I started an OnlyFans account a few years back now, and I've been recognized a grand total of 3 times. Because of my tattoos. I keep them covered up in my job, because it's the kind that really doesn't like you showing off ink like that, let alone how badly they freak if they knew I had an OnlyFans. The point is, I like to be discreet, and my subs, for the most part, seem to understand that. The first time was about a week after my birthday. I told my subs that it was my birthday month, to be discreet, while still raking in the birthday tips. So although they didn't know exactly when I was born, they knew it was like roughly that time of the year. I had one guy give me a few looks on the subway, which isn't totally out of the ordinary, if I'm honest, but just before he got off, he barely even looked at me as he said, "Happy birthday," and call me by my username. Like I said, he didn't make it obvious who he was talking to. He just ghosted immediately after, and there was no other interaction. I mean, if you're going to get recognized for OnlyFans, you could do way worse than that. Second time was by a guy who literally screeched to stop on his bike, pedaled back to look at me, and turned bright red, and said, "Oh, my God," and literally zoomed away, like I was going to attack him or something. Granted, you could have been just having a moment, but trust me, when you have an OnlyFans, you just sort of know where people recognize you from. Anyway, now for the third time, and by far the worst time. I don't show my face on my OnlyFans, but I did used to show my tattoos though, not anymore. God bless those cute arm sleeve things. So this one time, a guy stops, visibly starts checking out my tattoos, before he kind of gasps and looks up at me. I just play it cool, like there have been some kind of mistake. There blatantly hadn't, and just ignore him, while I carry on reading and drinking my coffee. I have expected him to keep moving, but he didn't. He sat down next to me and started calling me by my username. I'd never been confronted like that. And then didn't exactly put me in the mood to be like, "Oh, hi, yeah, it's me." So I continued to deny it, while also shooting him this look that tried to say, "Dude, stop. It's me, sure, but please, just shut up." But then he reacts in such a horrid, violent way. Like, "What, you think I'm dumb, huh? You take my money, the money I work my butt off for, and you won't even acknowledge me in the street." That was his cue to just go off. And this guy just tore into me while an entire coffee shop and passers-by looked on. I'd rather not give him the satisfaction, repeating what he said, or go into detail about how much it hurt my feelings. But I'll put it this way. I spend almost $90 on arm sleeves to cover up my tats. And I haven't been recognized since. It really did mess with me for a while though. Like the reoccurring thought was, you were lucky he found you in the day. If that had been the night, on some dark street somewhere, I might not have been nearly as lucky. And I might not have walked away at all. I'd gone the first 22 years of life without having any near-death experiences, and hoped to make it through the rest the same way. Unfortunately, a month ago. I was put in such a terrifying position. I was afraid my life was about to end. The gist of the story is that I was the victim of mistaken identity. When I've been able to gather in the interim, a former female employee was having a trust with a fellow male employee, and her boyfriend or ex-boyfriend, I'm still not sure, did not approve of the relationship. I want to start by saying that I never worked with or even knew the woman in question. Being a gay man, she wouldn't have been my type if I had a couple of people that were around. When she was told me that she and the man she was sleeping with had been fired a good 6 months prior to my employment, the unlucky coincidence appears to be that he and I share the same first name. In physical description, this had to have been why I was confused with him. A quiet evening in July, I was working, waiting tables, and just before 7:30, I got a single male sat in my section. He didn't look especially mean upon first sight, but he was a rather large man. I'm 5'11", and this man towered over me. Nothing was said at first. I took his drink order, and when I returned with it, he confronted me about the affair. She is a loser that's banging my girl. I asked him to repeat what he'd said, and only got more hostility in return. You heard me, boy. Ginger told me about your affair last night. His demeanor terrified me. I knew if he wanted, he could easily destroy me. Fighting never been my forte, and a guy his size would have no trouble laying me out. I did my best to assure him I didn't know his girlfriend, but this only made him angrier. Listen, you can deny it all you want, but she told me your name and what you look like. Saying you don't know her is just making me more mad. I could see the hate burning in his eyes. He spoke with gritted teeth and spittles beginning to come out of the corners of his mouth. My shaking head would have been obvious to him. I was on the verge of running away, but I didn't want to come off as any bigger a coward than I already was. I'm sorry, sir. I know he want to make you angry, but I swear that I've never met a girl named Ginger in my entire life. If she worked here, it must have been before I started. I literally only worked here for a few months. Any relationship I had ever had hasn't even included a female. You get my meaning? It took a moment, but he cut on, and his scalp morphed into a smoke grin in seconds. Telling a complete stranger about my preferences wasn't a discussion I wanted to have. However, I was out of ideas and decided on the Hail Mary. You look like one of those deviants, but it's gonna take a lot more to convince me than that. Playing that card must have been a bad idea. Although his voice had lowered slightly, he was balling his hands into this, and this made my trembling worse. Why don't you man up and admit you were balling my girl? You got a whooping coming either way if you admit it. I might be a bit easier on you. It was as if he hadn't heard anything I'd said since he first accused me. The whole time this had been going on, I hadn't been aware of what else was going on around me. Someone in the restaurant Perhaps a patron had notified my manager. What was happening at this table? He came around just as the man had threatened to assault me and interrupted the conversation. "Excuse me, sir. I just overheard your threat toward my employee, and that is something I cannot allow customers to do. I'd like you to leave immediately, or I'll be forced to call the police." "You can call over you want. I don't care. I'm just here to tell this little wimp I'm gonna give him a stomping for banging my ginger." The manager's threat didn't seem to make any difference to the man. He was still just as mad before, and wasn't showing any signs of leaving. "Sir, if you mean Ginger, the girl who left her more than 6 months ago, I can almost guarantee you that this young man never had any interactions with her. Now, there was another young man with the same name as him that I was forced to fire, the same time as Ginger. I inform every employee at the time they are hired that relationships between employees are forbidden, especially when one of those employees are management. A rumor that they were violating this policy reached me, and when asked about it, they both confirmed it. Because of this, they were both terminated that same day. This young man is a new employee, and to my knowledge, does not know either of these two. Maybe you should go back to Ginger and ask her to be more specific about the situation. Like I said, I can't have people coming into my restaurant and threatening my employees. You heard the real story, so now you can leave. Please do so now." The entire time my manager spoke, he never raised his voice except for the end. Even then, he kept his composure. I think because of this, the man finally started to believe what I had told him. He stood up at the table, and he must have been at least 6'5". One more shudder of fear shot through me when I realized how massive he was. "Okay, mister. I'm gonna go and have a talking to Ginger again. If I find out you lied to me, I'm coming back and putting both of you down." The man in turned for the exit. "I recommend you not do that, sir." My manager hit him with one more parting shot as he left, but the giant ignored it. Once he was gone, I could finally breathe again. After I took a few minutes to calm myself, I returned to work. That evening and every shift I've worked since, our manager has made sure to walk with me to my car when I get off. He said that permit to carry a handgun for some time, so the safety measure does make me feel secure. I don't think he's really worried about himself. Since we have our own parking area in the back of the building, not many other people come back there. I'm not even sure many other people know about it. I nor anyone else have seen the man since that night. But we'll probably continue with the escorts for the foreseeable future. I pray each day I leave for work that I won't see that monster ever again. If he does return, I'll update my post. However, I'm pretty sure if he was going to, he would have by now. Let's hope I'm right. What I'm sharing may not be as serious as many of the other stories I've seen, but one recent incident in particular is led me to think I should reach out to someone for advice. I'm a 24-year-old female, that is, just lost my job as a personal assistant to a mid-level executive in the fashion industry. My termination came so quickly. I was unable to find another job in the same line of work before my rent came due. Desperation drove me to apply for a waitress job at a small family restaurant near my apartment. Despite having no prior history waiting tables, I got the job. I guess the owners were as desperate as I was at that moment. My first shift was on a Monday afternoon, and I soon came to realize I enjoyed the work. Most of the customers were regulars, and they were very kind and understanding of my hiccups and tipped well. It didn't take long for me to catch on, and I was allowed to take as many shifts as I wanted. Before I knew it, I've got my bills paid for the month and even had a little leftover for a celebratory bottle of wine. As I write this, I've worked at the restaurant for 3 months, and almost every minute on the clock has been a blast. Crazy, right? Yeah, I know. It's not a sentence I'd ever expected to say when I agreed to take the job. At first, my intention was to stay only long enough to get another fashion-related job, but finding out I was good at the table waiting thing has greatly increased my self-esteem. Not to mention the money is good. I can't say I had any complaints about the job until a few weeks ago. On a late Sunday evening, one of the regulars appeared to have formed a crush on me. I wasn't aware of at the time, or even aware of him, until I waited on him the following lunch shift. He had been on an extended vacation, and now that I have met him, I wish he would have stayed where he was. The customer in question is the 64-year-old gentleman who recently retired from the drilling industry. Not exactly my type, I must say, and a bit too old for me. My introduction to him wasn't any more strange than any of the other regulars. However, the way in which he stared at me the entire time made me nervous. Then he left me $100 tips on a $6.50 tab. My initial reaction was one of joy, but as I dwelled upon it, I became uncomfortable with taking it. His return on that Thursday afternoon escalated my discomfort to an entire new level. I attempted to wait on him, as he was just another customer, but his reasons behind the massive tip soon became obvious. When I took his drink order, he asked me if I appreciated my large tip. This gave me the opportunity to tell him I wasn't comfortable taking a tip that large. But he interrupted me before I had the chance and hinted that I was now beholden to go on a date with him. The idea disarmed me. I wasn't sure that he meant what I thought. But just to be safe, I returned the $100 bill to him. The last thing I wanted to be seen as was some form of prostitute. When he was young, some women who waited tables may have sold themselves, but this girl is no whore. When I handed the bill back to him, a look of shock appeared on his face, soon followed by a big smile. All he could say was, "I've never seen a woman turned out a $100 bill. Now I see how it's gonna be." This reaction confused me. It was exactly the opposite of what I'd hoped for. I expected him to get mad, or at least get that I wasn't for sale. And thinking I was playing hard to get scared me a little, however. I did consider that maybe I was, perhaps misunderstanding what he meant. Our age gap could be making me misconstrue his intentions. It was possible he was only trying to show his appreciation for my services. The remainder of this time in the restaurant that day, I said very little to him, and he met me with his usual fawning gaze. Once he left, a load of relief was lifted from my shoulders. It was short-lived, however, and when I returned to the table and saw the $100 bill sitting there. This is beginning to look like some type of game. He was playing with me. I had the impression that once I accepted that tip, I would be accepting of much more in his mind. This brings us up to a few days ago, when he was once again seated in my section. Before I could do anything, I had to make it clear that I could not accept the $100 tip. Once again, I handed it back to him and told him that I was in a long-term relationship and could not go out with him even once. My speech didn't appear to make a dent in this facade. He replied by saying that he had no idea what I was talking about, but as he said it, a sly, childish grin was pasted on his face. I was starting to become angry at the way he was acting, and stormed off to get his drink. But the time I made it back, something had very much changed in this demeanor. The usual doting and loving eyes had disappeared, and been replaced by a simmering fury I would have never expected to come from him. His grin was no longer there. His face became expressionless and cold. When I noticed this change, a jolt of fear shot through me. From that point, nothing else was set between us. One thing did not change, however. When I returned to the table, the $100 bill was sitting there. When it was now joined by a small folded piece of paper, I unfolded it and saw that it was a brief, handwritten note. It simply read, "It would benefit you to accept this." A shiver tore through me. I was almost positive he didn't intend this to be friendly, although it wasn't necessarily threatening sounding. His attitude change gave me the impression it was a helpful hint. The entire predicament has made me confused and unsure of how to move forward. On one hand, the gentleman has not come out and clearly threatened me in any way. Up into our last interaction, he was nothing but happy and kind towards me. He also has never actually claimed to want to go on a date with me. As a matter of fact, he denied that this was his desire when I confronted him about it. To top it all off, I don't know one waitress who would dare turn down a $100 tip and see if there's anything other than a show of thanks for good service. When it comes to the change of personality, for all I am aware, something terrible could have occurred while I had gone getting his drink. It may have zero to do with me. On the other, however, his instance that I accept the large tip clearly makes me uncomfortable. He has to be able to see this. Continuing to insist, I accept it should be a bad sign. The split-second change in his attitude, after I told him I was not interested, was more than likely connected. Even if it was not, the speed at which he could become so different, in the darkness of his eyes, would certainly give anyone pause. As if it even needs to be said. putting the tip in the ominously written note, together with the very unsettling interaction we had just had. I'm of the almost 100% belief that I was being threatened. Nevertheless, even after writing this, I'm completely at my wit's end and have no idea of how to proceed. This gentleman is a longtime customer of the restaurant, and up until a few days ago, I've had nothing but positive, if not slightly difficult interactions with him. Since my grandparents had passed away before I was born, I've spent very little time with people of his age, and I'm afraid I have mistaken harmless flirting with that of a predator. Therefore, I put this to you. What action do you think I should take next? Am I being an oversensitive snowflake, or do you see trouble in my future? Any feedback will be taken into account and considered. I definitely wouldn't be putting myself out like this if I didn't feel I may be in trouble. I need help and I need it now.